They haven't. They haven't. Poor old sails. Oh yes. Sharky and his mates.
They might come for a ride with us. Oh, there's a few coming in.
Oh, they've caught up with the girls. Beautiful light westerly blowing. Perfect for sailing.
When you're ready.
Is it? Okay, yeah. Oh, here he comes. I think this is Vader.
Come for a ride on the bow.
The boys are sometimes a bit more interactive than the girls. Here they come.
Beautiful.
Watch for Sharky. He's got that. Alright. Very cool. Well, let's see if we can go and find some of their oceanic cousins. We're going to head out offshore. Maybe we'll find some humpbacks. Yep. 6 baby dolphins born this year, and we have 4 calves from last year. So when the babies get to about 2, the young males generally leave the maternal pod, and but the young females tend to stay in the maternal pod pretty much all their lives, and that's what we've observed in this pod. But the young males generally take off. They're totally dependent. All the dolphin babies are totally dependent upon their mums for 18 months, and they'll still top up their immune system with suckling for over 2 years. But as I say, the young males generally get kicked out of home when they're about 2. The mum fixes them up with a young male from some other group, and actually they might just leave the pod, probably sick of all the chatter.
When someone asks a question,
Yep.
you should repeat the question.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Broadcast rather than them.
Yeah, good idea. So that was a question we had of how many baby dolphins are there in the pod. So 6 born this summer, and 4 from last year, and after that we consider them juveniles or sub-adults.
Right? Stacy asks, are there any whales yet?
Stacey asked, are there any whales yet? Well, the answer to that is there are always whales off our coastline, but the whales that we most commonly see from headlands or from boats travelling along the coast are humpbacks, and humpbacks migrate along both the east and west coast of Australia, and about this time of the year they're starting to make their move up from their feeding grounds in the Antarctic, which is where they've been during the summer months. So the humpbacks of Australia, both west and east coast, feed on krill primarily down in the Southern Ocean around the South Polar Ice Shelf, and then move up into the tropical regions, and in the case of the east coast of Australia, up in the Barrier Reef, which is their main breeding ground. So there'll be a lot of carrying on up there from sort of May through to September, and then we start seeing them coming back down the coast late September and October and all the way into early November. And around October, November is when we see the mothers with their calves coming down, and that's my favourite month of the entire year, because the baby humpbacks are big babies and they're very energetic, and they're guzzling between 300 and 400 litres of milk a day, and it's not like cow's milk. It's very thick consistency of toothpaste, and it's almost entirely fat and sugar, and after they've had a big guzzle they start jumping around and very energetic. So I love October and early November with the humpbacks and their babies. Now when we first started whale watching back in 95, 96, there were only about 1,800 humpbacks according to the National Parks and Wildlife Service on the East Coast. The East Coast population was reduced to around 200 or 300. Just a few hundred animals were remnant after all those days of whaling. And of course Australia, like most countries in the world with the seaboard, was a whaling country, and mainly it was for oil, whale oil. Pretty much all the cars built up until 1978, particularly in the United States, that were running automatic transmissions were using whale oil. It was only when the emissions were reduced on cars and they started running the motors a bit hotter, that was when the whale oil didn't function so well and they had to make something else.
Someone has asked, do the dolphins always stay in the bay?
Do the dolphins always stay in the bay? Well,
Bay
no.
area.
No, but they do stay in the area. Now, the population of dolphins in Port Stephens is genetically related to at least 2 other populations offshore. One we call the Broughton Island pod, because they hang out between Port Stephens and Broughton Island, which is 10 miles north, and the other we call the Newcastle pod, and they are often seen around Newcastle, including in the harbour, and occasionally we'll see some of the Newcastle girls up here, especially when they're giving birth. The bay is used a little bit like a nursery, and the local dolphins sometimes do cruise out offshore, and we're going to go and have a look and see if we can find some offshore. So we're heading up towards the entrance now. Yakabar off to our port side, Tomaree down to the south, and that's Shoal Bay over there, those buildings. Shoal Bay, one of the villages, the little communities of Port Stephens. There's no town of Port Stephens, it's just a collection of coastal communities and little villages inland, including Raymond Terrace, known as the Terrace. So Shoal Bay, Nelson Bay, Fingal Bay, Anna Bay, Salamander Bay, all part of Port Stephens. All right. Well, we're going to head up. We'll pass around the seaward side of Tomaree. So Tomaree, fantastic headland, special place for the Worimi. So as the waters warmed over the last 20,000 years, during the last ice age, the oceans were around 120 metres lower than they are today. So the coastline was around 25 nautical miles further out to sea than it is today. But when the Worimi walked in, it had already risen by about 70 metres. Tomaree, special place. During World War II, it was a training facility for US and Allied troops, amphibious troops, the Marines that were landing on the beaches. 22,000 amphibious troops trained here between 1942 and 1943. All right. What a day. So we're hoping to keep the Tomaree Hospital, which was the World War II barracks for the Australian troops. We're hoping to keep that in community ownership. It's in the State Health Department at the moment. It provides home for a decreasing number of mentally challenged folk, and but soon it's going to be redundant to that, and many of us in the community are lobbying the state government to keep it as a marine interpretive centre, a museum. We don't have a museum in Port Stephens, not a proper museum, and there's lots of wonderful information and memorabilia. Looks like we've lost. I wonder if we hang that aerial.
Back.
Oh, back again.
I had you back.
So we are experimenting. We've got all sorts of equipment on board to do this live, but it looks like we might be at the extent of our radio range with the cameras.
Oh, no, we're back.
Are we back? Oh, very good. So as you gather, this is very exploratory. Our first attempt at Port Stephens live. Perfect day for going offshore, eh, Rog? Yep. So in the previous little segment, we rescued a mutton bird, and he's still here behind us.
You have to check out him for a little while.
We might have to check out our little mutton bird to see how he's going. We've given him a bit of water. He seems to have settled down. He's as cute as. Almost certainly born on one of the islands. Broughton Island, as I say, has a population of over 100,000 nesting pair, and they nest on the ground in burrows. And this little guy, he wasn't doing very well. On his maiden flight, he didn't make it, and he was struggling, and he would have almost certainly died and been shark bait, but he gets a second chance. So imagine would normally be running eco cruises and eco tourism, which is becoming very popular these days because we all want to know more and more about our natural environment. Most people in Australia live in cities, and that's common to the rest of the world. So when we go on holiday, most people want to go somewhere where it's more natural. And what we have in Port Stephens is very natural. It's a beautiful area.
I thought you had switched off. I thought you had turned it off.
I just stayed back on the
Oh, no, I'm gonna go. Okay.
That's all right.
Just not figure out my own phone. Oh, we've done a good one.
Yeah, that's right.
Because I wanted to see if it's okay to stop.
Are we still live?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's okay, because that's what we're going to work out. I mean, everyone is walking around the park is going to make a mistake, but then saying...
So we're feeling a little bit of rock and roll here as we kind of go through the heads. Port Stephens was always considered a deep water port. It was first settled by colonials around the early 1800s. In fact, in 1826, Port Stephens was settled by the Royal Australian Agricultural Company, which took up a 1 million acre grant of land from the Crown. And they moved around 500 convicts here from Britain. Those naughty Poms who stole bread to feed their families when there was no work. No work here now today, but we're not angling to go and steal bread. We might throw a line over, catch a couple of fish.
I don't think so. You forgot the lines.
Oh, we forgot the lines. All right.
In fact, we don't usually have them. What good time to fish, though.
It's a good time, and you are allowed to go fishing. Is an allowable activity.
There's so many of them.
It comes into the category, I think, of exercise and mental stability, like gardening. Some part of your brain just switches off when you're out in the garden.
All right.
So Port Stephens is all volcanic, very different. If you're anywhere living south of Port Stephens, including Newcastle, Central Coast and Sydney, it's all sandstone, whereas Port Stephens is part of a very ancient lava flow. And all these are volcanic peaks, hard, igneous rock. So we're just crossing over the bar. Is he still on there?
Back to you.
So Tomaree was known as Fort Tomaree during World War II, Port Tomaree, all of those you'll see as we get a little closer. Some of the gun emplacements that were built by the engineers. Fort Tomaree, there was a huge radar station on the top of the hill. Lots of soldiers manned these gun emplacements and lookouts. It was a hive of activity because it was thought that this might be a potential landing site for soldiers that we didn't want to occupy the port. There was torpedo tubes, all sorts of huge guns up in the naval artillery up in the forest that you sort of can't see from here. But the Tomaree National Park, so all of the peaks.
Zooming right in on the gun emplacements now.
Great. So you'll see some of those gun emplacements there, built at a time when Australia was worried that Japanese would come and take over Australia. The radar that was on the top of Tomaree was, or the remains of it, was taken down to Williamtown Air Base and rebuilt. And you can see it at Fighter World down there. The original radar reconstructed, huge shipping radar, I think it was, on the top of there. Or we might have to cover the Fighter World at Williamtown Air Base. Fighter World's one of the great attractions of Port Stephens. Jet planes, propeller planes, all sorts of planes. Because Williamtown was a military air base long before it became a civilian air base. Port Stephens Council and Newcastle Council both collaborated to build the civilian side of Newcastle Airport, but they borrowed the military runways which were built before World War II. Some of these gun emplacements are looking a bit knocked around. That one was only 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and a huge storm broke some of the concrete works up. After 70 years of sustaining some pretty wild seas, they're starting to decompose a little bit. So right up in front of us, the lighthouse of Point Stephens is just coming into view. Point Stephens was also named by Captain Cook in 1770 on his great voyage of discovery, where he sailed past the port in the Endeavour, and he wrote about a page in his logbook about what he saw from the masthead of the Endeavour. But Point Stephens, the easterly part of the Hunter coastline, is today on an island known as Fingal Island. But when Captain Cook came past, it was joined to the mainland. But in the late 1890s, a gale took out the joining link, and it's never come back in permanently ever since. There is a narrow spit of sand at the moment there called the Spit. Oh, looking up at the gap on our starboard side. Now, that's a huge volcanic chimney that's collapsed into the ocean. It's known locally as Mrs. Murphy's, but I can't go any further than that. But apparently she was a very liberal fisherman's wife. Might have been popular with some of the boys when her husband was away at sea. But it's a popular fishing spot, and you'll see our friend complying here, fishing. It's a great spot to fish. Oh, look at
my
that!
gosh.
Look at that
Wow.
fish! Whoa!
Wow.
What a beauty!
We'll see you for dinner.
You're live on Port Stephens Live.
Wow.
We'll be going around to his for dinner, I think.
I don't think that's so small just to throw it away.
That's what you can catch in Port Stephens. Now there's some folk up here on the rocks doing a bit of fishing. So Port Stephens is one of those places where you can actually catch big fish, even on the rocks. So these guys are on West Point.
They're all apart. They're all participating.
They're all socially distancing. How very cool. What a great day to go fishing. It's exercise, sanity.
Can't believe it.
What was that fish? That was a tuna or albacore or something?
Get a good look at it.
It looked like should have been a yellowfin tuna, I reckon. Fishing, one of the great occupations of Port Stephens. Port Stephens became a very popular fishing place way back. The Warramai were great fisher people, and I heard that the Warramai were the first technically to build a fish hook. Out of a piece of shell, I think it was. So later on in Port Stephens Live, we're going to interview one of the famous fishermen of Port Stephens, John Stinker Clark. He's been writing a column in the Examiner, I think, for about 30 years. John Clark. We've got to go and interview John Clark later on. Stinker. He's also an author. He's authored numerous books on the local area. He's an absolute legend. He, Stinker was the first bloke I met when I came up here to caretake Point Stephens Lighthouse in the late 1980s. 1989, 1990, I was angling to be the last caretaker, or the caretaker of the lighthouse.
And it turned out you were the last one.
And yes, as it turned out, I was the last one because it was sent from the federal government, AMSA, through to the state government, and they didn't want anyone in it. And sadly, the cottage got burned out. I had to pack my bags, go home, so it was a very brief time. But then, after it was burnt out, I came back and moved up here with my family to try and rebuild the cottage. We cleaned the cottage with a whole bunch of volunteers, but that's another story we'll tell later on. But John Clark was the first bloke I met. He was out fishing on some rocks. Couldn't believe it. He's half fish. Alright, well, we're going to head up towards Point Stephens. Fingal Spit over on our starboard side is a notorious piece of sand, probably the most dangerous single sandbank in New South Wales. 15 people have died crossing that spit at the wrong time, and I nearly lost a four-wheel drive when I was the caretaker of the spit. I want to switch over to his camera. Okay, there's the spit there now. Looks highly crossable. In fact, looks like there's a commercial fisherman in his truck sitting on the spit. So it's walkable at low tide at the moment, and fantastic. get over to the island there. The island is in the national park and well worth a visit. We actually run tours out there to the lighthouse, so we could take people up the lighthouse now. We've got the keys, so that'll be another story, I think. But the Fingal Spit, I remember driving my old Land Rover across there, and I wound up having to open the door to let it see through because I left my run a bit late, so I was a bit lucky not to get that bolt. But definitely have to watch your tides. If you're attempting to cross the spit, make sure that there's no water over it. Fingal Island was one of the hotspots for the Warramai. As the oceans rose, it effectively separated the Warramai nation. Down to the south was the Myangle, which I believe literally means people of the salt water, the sea. And up to the north was the Garapingal, and they lived around the Mile River and the Mile Lakes. And inland was the Garuagal, and they lived around where Karua is today. The Myangle were the great fisher people, and they used to send their wives in to collect lobsters. So the blokes reckoned that it was better to send the girls in to get the lobsters because the blokes were a better shot with the stones to drive off the sharks. That was their story. They reckoned the women weren't much good at throwing stones, whereas the blokes would pelt the sharks as they came in to grab their women. There were lots of sharks in the bay in those days. Not so many now, sadly. So Point Stevens, the easterlymost part of the Hunter coastline, and it is a place of marine activity. Often we'll find dolphins around there, and in the winter we might see some seals, and all the humpbacks going north. We might see one or two today. It's still a bit early in the season. We will do a virtual whale tour a bit later on, but we'll keep a good lookout for those telltale blows.
Okay. Ready? 20 minutes left of the power that then we got to charge it. We have a charger that takes a while.
Okay.
That camera.
Do you want
one battery so far?
Okay.
Yeah.
We've got 20 minutes.
Yeah, so we can turn it off.
All right. Okay. There may be some dolphins just up here, and if they are, they'll probably be common dolphins, so they're a different type of dolphin. So maybe if we hang for 5 minutes, and we'll see. I'm looking at a bit of activity, so. We've got a bit of activity up ahead of us. I'm seeing some mutton birds, which is like our little mate behind us, who's still going okay, but there's mutton birds getting ready to fly to the north, but I'm looking at some splashing, so I'm hoping we might find some more dolphins, and there's a good chance these will be a different species of dolphins than our bay bottlenose. Normally, on a day like this, in the early morning, we would be out taking people swimming with dolphins. And the dolphins we generally swim with, Dolphins Swim Australia, are common dolphin, short-beaked common dolphin. Sometimes we swim with the big oceanic bottlenose, but never with the bay dolphin. But the common dolphin are fantastic. Probably the most sociable marine mammal that we see in our waters around here, the common dolphin, and they will always come and bow ride. Now, there's the close-up of the lighthouse over there. Fantastic. It's about the oldest operational light on the east coast. The Hornby light in Sydney is probably the oldest light, but I don't think it's operational these days. And Macquarie Light was rebuilt after it burnt down, I believe. So it's not as old as this one. This old light's been continuously operating since 1861, when Port Stephens was one of the busiest ports in Australia. Wouldn't know it today.
Talk about a couple of the shipwrecks.
We've got more shipwrecks between 20 miles north, Seal Rocks, and down to Newcastle, 20 miles south, than anywhere else in Australia except that notorious stretch of water, Bass Strait. Oh, we've got a helicopter over the tower there. There's a rescue helicopter. You can see why Port Stephens is such a great place for fishing. All these little coves over on the island there was old Aboriginal fish trap. It's a lagoon with a massive midden that was occupied by the Warramai for probably thousands of years, and the entire beach is covered in shell from discarded dinners. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you can shut it down. What I was looking at wasn't there. So we're going to finish very soon, and if we find some common dolphin, we'll fire it up again. There's the old ruined lighthouse up there. Very sad. The old light station was a beautiful place. You see the little... There it goes. That little tiny building was the outside dunny, and it had the best view, I think, of any dunny in Australia.
There's the helicopter that's flying.
I wonder what that helicopter's doing.
Rescuing someone.
Looks like he might be rescuing somebody.
Let's go and have a look.
Let's go have a look. we still live? Fantastic. Light station. All this little cove here is Shark Bay, also known as Lighthouse Cove. We take people snorkeling there in the summer. Are we still on?
Turn the camera off to save the camera's battery, so that when we find the common dolphins or maybe some oceanic corals, we've still got a bit of battery left.
Okay, so we're saving our main camera. So that if we find some common dolphins or maybe humpbacks, we'll be able to fire it up again. So there it is, Shark Bay, also known as Lighthouse Cove.
Can't really show it, right? The camera's saving.
All right.
This is where we use the whale highway. It's coming across the whale highway.
So this is what we call the Humpback Highway, where we are right now. In another few weeks, we'll be seeing lots of humpbacks. There are over 37,000 humpback whales now that are making this journey. As I say, originally back in '95, probably only around 1,800 humpbacks survived after the whaling onslaught, which finished pretty much on humpbacks in 1986, and it was when the Russian whaling fleet returned to Russia empty-handed. They couldn't find any whales. They'd all been killed. So the moratorium that was decreed by the IWC, the International Whaling Commission, in 1986 kicked in, and the humpbacks, along with all the other whales, got a bit of a breather. Thank heavens. Of course, these days, the humpbacks that arrive in the winter, which is historically a very quiet time for tourism along the east coast, because most people are either going skiing or they've gone up to the Barrier Reef to warm up, whereas now the humpbacks provide an endless experience of delight along our east and west coasts. Australia, we're very lucky. We've got, I believe, the two largest populations of humpbacks in the world, bar none. If you don't want to go out on a boat, you can usually see them if you stand on a headland anywhere along the east coast, from late May through to July. They're all coming north, and then later on in the year they're coming south. And we've got so many young whales now, juveniles, that are too old to be with their mums, but not old enough to be mating, and they hang out off the coast, and they're very curious. So if you're on a boat along the east coast, you definitely have to keep a good lookout. look into that sparkly water, you see over Shark Island into the towards the bay, those beautiful mountain ranges, and all the islands spread out to the north of us. Cabbage Tree, Bundelbar, Little Island, and then right up to the north, about 12 miles away, is Broughton Island. So when we're offshore, we tend to talk in miles. That's nautical miles, and which is roughly 1 nautical mile is about 2 kilometres. I know there'll be people that aren't that familiar with miles anymore. Already the sea temperature is 22.5 degrees centigrade. Oh, there's a dolphin. What have we got here? Oh, it's a seal. Thought it was a dolphin, but it's a seal. Where's our cameraman? Where's our cameraman?
He's charging up his thing.
So this is an Australian fur seal. He's onto something. Can you switch over to the seal camera?
He's charging it up.
Just behind us there, finding his lunch. So seals were once quite prolific along the east coast, but for many years we didn't see any at all. Seal Rocks is one of the points to the north of Port Stephens, and obviously there were lots of seals there at some point. But we've got 2 here. So fur seals were the first export commodity of Australia. Long before wheat and wool and coal, these guys were giving it up. Their pelts were highly sought after back in Europe, and literally the first export of Australia. And sadly, over 360,000 fur seals were slaughtered in the early part of the colony. Not just for their fur pelts, but their fat was rendered down for lamp oil, and I guess their meat might have been eaten as well. All right. Fantastic. We've started seeing them make a resurgence around 20 years ago. Oh, look, they're chasing fish everywhere here. I said it all goes on off Point Stevens. There's always something happening here. Whee! Big animals, they grow to about 300 kilos, the males, and over 3 meters long. So they've been hauling out on Cabbage Tree Island, which we might have a look at later on. Fantastic. 2 of them fishing together. Well, that's good. How's our mutton bird? Is he? Oh, he's trying to fly.
Yes, he's trying to go.
He's trying to go.
He'd have no chance out either.
No, he wouldn't. He'd be a goner. All right. Okay, we're going to head due east and get right out into that hot water of the East Coast Current. Just find some common dolphin. Out on the horizon, a big bulk carrier coal ship heading down to Newcastle. Fill up with coal. At times we've seen over 90 ships out here waiting to take on coal.
Now there's one.
Now there's just one.
They can't give it away.
We can't give it away. Sign of the times. Most of the coal goes to Asia. Power up those big industries. So what we're looking for now are maybe little flocks of birds that might circle over the top of fish, because they're the little tips that we look for where the dolphins could be. So we're looking for birds, or if we see some splashing. I'm going to go and check out a bit of splashing. I'm seeing about 1 nautical mile in front of us.
Mm-hmm.